Thank you, darling. We all appreciate you doing that so much, and we hope that Karen will soon be well. We've got a few minutes, so if you want to...
Son and a daughter. Her husband Gary is one of the teachers in the school here, and Sarah herself teaches in the wives program. And Gary and Sarah together are very hospitable and helpful to students. I'm impressed constantly by Sarah's Bible knowledge and her ability to discern. She's really a very special friend, and we really love her here. She's done her homework for this lecture and has researched her subject well. So fasten your seatbelt, and I present to you my friend Sarah.
Let's see, I need to clip this somewhere. Well, the rumors are true. I did attend a witches' sabbat this summer in preparation for this lecture. And also, I'm wound up tighter than the proverbial 8-day clock. So you are going to have to just hang on. This has impacted my thinking and my teaching more than about anything I've ever researched. At first, when I got this subject, Satanism and the occult, I was angry at Maxie. I said, I don't want to talk about that stuff. I don't want to read about it. But it has really motivated me and helped me see some things that I think we need to be aware of in the church today. As I began to research this, I began doing a lot of reading. I spent hours and hours in Barnes & Noble reading and taking notes. And as I was doing that, two things hit me. One is I was going everywhere fast and getting nowhere. The other thing is, what did I really know about witchcraft, Satanism, the occult? What did I know about that? The only thing I knew was secondhand. And I didn't even know if the books that I was reading from were credible in that community. So I was concerned because I wanted to represent to you honestly and accurately what these people believe and what they practice. And that's when I remembered Laura Lee Ford. Some of you know Laura Lee. She came to the School of Preaching a few years ago. She's a young lady who wants to honor God, to serve Him, to increase her knowledge of God's Word, and help spread the borders of His kingdom. And Laura Lee took off a day of work to be here today. And you might say, well, what's so special about Laura Lee? I'll tell you what's special. Her mother is a witch. Now, how many of us can claim that? There are some of us that probably wanted to say that a few times. But Laura Lee's mother is a high priestess in Wicca, which is the modern day name for witchcraft. Now, let me go back and tell you just a few things about that before you get suspicious of Laura Lee. Laura Lee's parents were both members of the Church of Christ. Her mother grew up in the church, ladies. She taught Bible classes and was faithful in attendance for quite some time. But Laura Lee's parents divorced when she was quite small. Her mother moved to Arlington with the children, and for a time they attended the Randall Mill congregation. But her father gained custody of the children when Laura Lee was about 3. And it was sometime after that her mother became involved in the pagan community in the Grand Prairie, Arlington area. There is a very strong and active pagan element in this area. I wasn't aware of it until this summer, but we need to be aware of that. From the time Laura Lee was 3 until she was about 10, she never saw her mother. And after that, only for about 2 weeks in the summer and then on Thanksgiving and Christmas occasionally. But Laura Lee put me in touch with her mother, and that's how on July 15th, 1997, I was able to interview Patti Lee Glass Kintop, known as Lady Phoenix in the Wiccan community. She was very cordial to me. She had a friend there whose name was Tim that I'll be referring to also in this lecture. But I think if Laura Lee's mom had known how this was going to affect me and how much this was going to turn me on, she might not have granted the interview. Now, She is very well respected in the Wiccan community. She's the owner of a store in Grand Prairie that caters to witchcraft and the pagan community. She regularly teaches classes on the rituals and practices of witchcraft 2 to 3 times a week. She presides at various feasts, observances, festivals, and initiations. She's writing a book called Pathway to the Cauldron. She gave me the first 2 chapters of that book. She practices hypnotherapy. She does astrological charts and tarot readings as a professional, she said, not necessarily as her ministry as a witch, but these things are involved in witchcraft. She's very involved in the use of psychic powers and what we would call the paranormal phenomenon. The manuscript, and you need to read that because there's no way I can go into all of that. The manuscript is a summary of that interview with some additions from a book called Witchcraft, the Oldest Religion by Dr. Leo Martello. Lady Phoenix assured me that he was very good in his facts concerning witchcraft. She said he's a little overzealous in his attacks on Christianity. She also suggested that I read the book, Drawing Down the Moon, and I did get a copy of that and read from some of that, and I quote from it in the manuscript because it was a source that she recommended and that I felt was highly credible. There are also several other things in the interview. For instance, a comparison to Christianity. Did I say in the interview? I meant to say in the manuscript. Okay. A comparison to Christianity is in there. Also, some things about how Satan works and why he works in the way that he works. And we just don't have time to deal with all of that today. So I want you to read the manuscript, and this is going to be supplemental to that. After the interview with her, she invited me to attend a Sabbat on August 1st, witches celebrate 8 Sabbats during the year. And it was just one of the few rituals where they do allow some visitors. Now, I didn't know if I really wanted to go to the Sabbat, but Gary encouraged me to go. He said this may be the only time you would have the opportunity to get this information and to be with these people. Today in this lecture, I'm going to just answer some of the questions I'm usually asked about this. I thought perhaps that was the best organization level to get through some of this material. First thing I'm usually asked is, were you afraid? No, I wasn't afraid. For I remembered 1 John 4:4, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. At the Sabbat, I was a little uncomfortable because I'm not used to being in situations like that and with people who think like that. Gary was a little more concerned about me, I think, than I was. And he went with me and he sat out in the car on the street so that I wouldn't be there totally by myself. He didn't go to the Sabbat because he wasn't invited. And we didn't want to offend them by asking if he could be there. Now, who are these people? Who are these people? They come from all walks of life. There were young professionals there. A college teacher, Tim, who I will refer to later, was a college teacher. There were young mothers there. In fact, the woman who hosted the Sabbat in her backyard is the mother of 3 children, and she was a high priestess in training. And hosting the Sabbat and presiding at that ritual was part of her training. Now, Lady Phoenix lives in a house very similar to mine, in a neighborhood very similar to mine. You could be living next door to a pagan or to a witch and not know it. They seemed rather normal. Now, some of them were dressed a little weird at the Sabbat, but really, you could meet these people on the street. You could work next door to them. You could stand in the checkout line at Eckerd's with them, and you would never notice any difference. What about their children? This is a very sad thing that I had to internalize as I was there, because there were some children playing in the yard out near the house as we were in the back of the yard in the circle. Most witches don't expose their children to elements of the craft. They do raise their children to be pagan, to know about and to worship the ancient deities. But witchcraft involves an oath of secrecy. And that's a pretty heavy thing to place upon a child, even on a teenager. So they usually don't bring their children really into witchcraft, but they do raise them to be pagan. What do they teach? What do they believe? Well, there's a lot of that in the manuscript, but I want to summarize some of it today. Wicca is a goddess-oriented religion, and that's one of the reasons I chose to narrow a lot of this to Wicca, because as a goddess-oriented religion, it does appeal to young women. And so we need to be aware of that. They place a lot of stress on the gift of the goddess. And in rituals like drawing down the moon, the high priestess becomes the channel of the goddess. Wicca is a nature religion, and as such, it's maintained the worship of the goddess of fertility, usually Diana or Isis, and also of the horn god or lord of the hunt or of the forest, sometimes related to Pan or Herne of mythology. Because the sun and moon closely affect our life patterns and the earth, they do observe the passage of the sun and the moon, and they worship at solstice. A witch ministers to or leads a coven, which is usually 12 or 13 people. Now, we've all heard that there's some symbolism about that, and Lady Phoenix did mention that there was some symbolism in regard to it, but she said it's mainly for practical purposes. Each witch keeps what she calls a book of shadows, and when I was first doing my research, I kept reading a reference to the book of shadows. Book of shadows. I thought that was something I could go and buy and read from. It's not. Now, probably the first book of shadows, at least in modern times, was kept by a man named Gerald Gardner, who is credited with the revival of the witchcraft in the 50s. Now, I don't think he's related to our Tom Gardner, but we'll check on that, okay? But in this book of shadows, a witch records her lore, her tradition, her training, the spells, and so on like that. So this is a record that she keeps. Lady Phoenix described to me her tradition of witchcraft as being from France with a blend of Isis worship and Roman patterns. Now, I knew enough about Isis worship from the study of the background of our New Testament, so I asked her about temple prostitutes in relating to the worship of Isis. And she noted this: a temple prostitute was a position of honor, and that since the king ruled by divine right, it was his responsibility to mate with the high priestess in the temple once a year, symbolizing the union of the god and the mother goddess from whom all life came. She said, so in a sense, it wasn't just a sex thing. Worship is not open to visitors. Usually only the members of the coven are present, and sometimes they will invite guests or students to be there. Now, these are the basic foundations, and you can read more about some of these, the backgrounds for these in the manuscript. They do have other characteristics, as we've noted before, like the use of psychic powers, the paranormal being mediums, astral travel, that is out-of-body travel, hypnosis, spells, healings, clairvoyance, using tools like the tarot cards and rituals. They believe in reincarnation. If you want a really good description of some of these things, like how it feels to travel out of the body and what it feels like to be a medium and what that experience is, I have this book called The Eagle and the Rose by Rosemary Altea, and she is an internationally known spiritualist and medium. She doesn't claim to be a witch, but she claims to do all of the things that witches claim to do. And her books have been on bestseller lists. She has been on some of the major talk shows and has been featured in some major magazines. And she's interesting. That's what's scary. I sat there and read that whole book, and it was, I mean, these people weave a good tale. But she's the sole authority behind what she's saying. Bear that in mind as you read through that. The one law in Wicca is, "An ye harm none, do as you will." Lady Phoenix explained to me that by will, we mean the mental will, not just what we want. She said harming someone is just not acceptable. I asked about their concept of evil. And she said, well, we have to live in a world where there is evil and we must deal with it, but we really don't teach regarding evil, sin, or guilt. The only evil or sin would be breaking that vow to harm none and being untrue to yourself because you are the divine spark. Hang on to that. You are the divine spark. It's not just God and Goddess. Now, if you and I realize that most witches look on their religion as one that allows certain experiences to happen, then we might realize why they don't feel a need for doctrine and dogma. And it might help us understand the subjectivity and the vagueness of that statement, and you harm none, do as you will. In fact, Lady Phoenix gave me the 2 chapters of her book, and 1 chapter is devoted to every one of those 8 words in that Wicca read and to explaining it. I read the whole thing, and I'm not dumb, but I came away not knowing much more than I did when I started. It's very subjective, and it's very ambiguous, and it's subject to the will of the person involved. And that's important. Okay, regarding the origin of the Wicca reed, some people say it's buried in the midst of time, way back there in ancient times, but other people credit Gerald Gardner, who revived modern day witchcraft with his book Witchcraft Today, which was published in 1954. They also say that he may have borrowed it from Aleister Crowley, and Aleister Crowley was an avowed Satanist as well as a witch. And there is some relationship, and you need to look in the manuscript to get more of this. There is some connection between Wicca and Satanism in some traditions, but not all. So I don't want to misrepresent them. Lady Phoenix is not involved in what we would call Satanism or Satan worship. But Gerald Gardner and Aleister Crowley, who are also leaders in Wicca, have had some connections with Satanism. So we don't need to misrepresent, but we also don't need to be lulled to sleep on some of this. Okay, Aleister Crowley used the Wicca reed, that any harm none, do as you will, to justify a lot of selfishness, and also to him it confirmed the fact that each one is the center of the cosmos. Now, what is their view of Jesus? Well, they see Jesus as what they call an avatar, or a manifestation of God in bodily form, much like Vishnu, the Hindu god. Or they may compare him sometimes to the religious leader Zoroaster. They've even compared him to Hercules of Greek mythology, or perhaps to Buddha, or other religious leaders. Lady Phoenix said this to me, and I quote, "Mary was a dove of the Essene temple, that is, a temple prostitute, and Jesus was a child of the temple, and so Joseph considered it an honor to take care of him." I asked her for her source because she said historical records show. I said, well, what's your source? She quoted from a book she called The Mystical Life of Jesus, and challenged us to know at least that these kinds of things are out there. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But she thinks of Jesus as just another God form, or that's the way most witches think of Jesus, if they think of him at all. Well, how do they worship? Well, in various ways, depending on the occasion. Is it an initiation, a festival, and also, are there visitors present? I think that's important. You see, I was a visitor there, and I was not aware of any channeling or of any special psychic phenomenon that went on, although, some of it could have happened because I was there. I don't know. But Tim did tell me, he was acting as high priest, and he did tell me that in the ritual, the high priestess does become the goddess. So at least she thought she became the goddess. I was just sitting there watching what was going on. I didn't know. The festival I attended was on August 1st, 1997. It's their Lunacy Festival. It was in the backyard of a house in an older section of Grand Prairie, not far off of Beltline Road. Before the ritual, Tim, who is a teacher in Dallas County Community College, brought in something made out of some sticks, like this, some dead sticks, and it looked kind of like this. It's about 2 feet tall. Now, I was going to make one. He said to us, he said, this is our symbol of the horned God who gives his life each season with the harvest. We're going to put him outside. He said, we originally were going to burn him, but we got so attached to him, we just decided we'd pass him around at each festival. Well, as I said, I was going to make one, so I collected some branches from out here on the churchyard and also went over to Janie McKenzie's and got some branches and everything, but I'm not real good at God making, and I guess, so I just didn't come through on that one. My mother always wanted to know if there was some course I would have failed, and I guess God making would have been it. But you get the idea. That was their symbol from a bunch of dead sticks. Now, Lady Phoenix gave me a 3 to 4 page manuscript. She would not let me take it with me. But she told me, she said, this is from a tradition very close to ours, and I would like for you to read it to get the ancient background for this ritual. And I had about 20 or 30 minutes there, so I was reading and taking notes as fast as I could. I'm going to give you the gist of what that said. But first of all, I've got to tell you about the cover sheet. The cover sheet had the words House of Black Rose on it, and then it had a drawing. I'm going to describe the drawing. I have a copy of it up here because I have a friend in San Antonio who's a good artist. And I called and said, would you copy this from my memory? This is not exactly like theirs, but it is very, very close to what was on the front of this cover sheet. The drawing shows a naked man sitting cross-legged. He's split from head to seat, and each side is out like this. There is a naked woman rising up out of him, and she is holding a scourge in one hand and a dagger in the other hand. Now, this was given to me because Lady Phoenix wanted me to feel good about witchcraft. She had even said to me, you are in a position to help parents whose children might be involved in this, and you can help them see that Wicca is just another pathway. Okay, I do have a copy of this in that blue folder if you want to look at it after the lecture. I don't want to offend anybody, but there's some things out there in the world that are offensive. Well, the notes that I took on this. The Lunicid Festival, usually celebrated July 31st in some traditions or August 1st in another, is the festival of first harvest to guarantee the favor of the gods by offering their most precious commodities. For the ancient farmers, the grains had a mystical life force. In the ancient rituals, they would take a small section of uncut grain, the reapers would pelt it with stone, then the fallen grain would remain there on the ground, they would pour wine over that, and in that way the spirit of the grain was fed. The grain was considered the masculine symbol rising out of the goddess mother. That is, the grain was the earth mother's son that was sacrificed every year at harvest. Now, this went on to say, and this is what's scary to me, okay? This went on to say, at Lunicid, we remember a time when bloody sacrifice was offered to ensure that the god and goddess of harvest were well fed, to thank them for giving the grains and the animals for human survival. It was a thank you festival to the deities. We remember the Native Americans, that the Cheyennes offered their bravest warrior as a sacrifice to the deities of harvest as a thanks. The Celts also sacrificed their warriors. It was the females who did the deed, who killed the sacrifice. It was the high priestess who wielded the blade. She was someone the deities trusted. The grains were gifts from the deities, and human sacrifice was sent as a messenger of thanks to the deities, and it was an honor to be the chosen one. Now that's from that 3 to 4 page manuscript that I was given to read from. I'm not making that up. The ritual itself. The high priest and high priestess were in green robes, kind of moo-moo type, a little past the knees. It was tied about with a belt. Some of the people there wore slacks or loose tunics. There was one guy that had a green hat with a feather in it, kind of a gesture-looking thing. None of them were nude. although this coven does sometimes work unrobed. They call this skyclad, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some of them wore some of the jewelry with some of the witchcraft symbols on it that you may have seen, like with dragons or things like that. But others there were dressed rather normally. We went into the circle. It was outlined with artificial flowers, and there was a metal archway above it, and that's where they'd hung their god, there by the metal archway. There was a small black cauldron in the center with fire burning. The high priest and priestess stood beside the archway, and as we entered the circle, we had to line up and enter the circle. As we entered the circle, she asked, "How do you enter the circle?" Now, Lady Phoenix had told me that their answer was in perfect love and perfect peace, but she said, "You can answer in any way you want to." Now, are you wondering, what did I say? Huh? Okay, yeah. I said, "I come in peace as an observer," because that's the way I had come. I had not come to disrupt what they were doing. Now, after we were seated, the high priest and priestess went to each direction. I think they began at the east. I'm not really sure on that. And they made the pentagram, the 5-point star pointing up to the deities. And there is a difference between the Wiccan pentagram and the Satanic pentagram. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. They then greeted each other. He said to her, "Hail Isis, mother of all gods," and she to him, "Ra, god of the sun." Then she took a dagger, and he held a chalice of wine, and she lowered the dagger into that cup and raised it, and they each kissed the dagger. Then they sat down. And Tim, who was acting as the high priest, spoke about this being the ancient festival of harvest and how with modern agricultural methods we're not involved in a real harvest, but we're going to harvest golds. And so he passed around a jar with nutmeg and lavender in it and asked each person to take a pinch of that and to put it on the fire, to walk up to the fire and put it on the fire there in the cauldron, and to say either orally or privately what goals they wanted to harvest during that year. The goals were things like finish my PhD, get a better job, this kind of thing. Then he asked them to write the goals on a sheet of paper and roll it up, put it in a nutmeg shell, and to let it grow and develop throughout the year. Tim then noted, a sacrifice was usually offered in ancient times, but we don't practice human sacrifice, but we do have a symbolic one. And he pulled the cover off of a little cornbread man, looked kind of like a gingerbread man, but wasn't decorated quite as cute. It was a cornbread man there in the center. And then they put some more alcohol into the pot, into the fire, to make it go up real high. And that was kind of scared me just a little bit because I wasn't expecting that, as symbolic of the sacrifice. Then they passed around a plate of cornbread, and each one took a piece and said to the person next to them, "Eat hearty, may you never hunger." Then they passed around a goblet of wine, and each one sipped from that and said to the next person, "Drink freely, may you never thirst." Now I said to Gary, the witches are one-cuppers. Okay. I have to be funny in some of this because, ladies, there's some things that are weird out there. They kept passing the cup of wine around and around more too. They did this chant. Here was their chant. We are the old people, we are the new people, we are the same people, younger than before. We are the old people, we are the new people, we are the same people, wiser than before. We are the old people, we are the new people, we are the same people, stronger than before, and then greater than before. And you see that shows you their belief in reincarnation, and that they believe that just one lifetime is not long enough to learn everything and to experience everything, so you have to have a whole lot more lifetimes. Now, Lady Phoenix talked to me about her real lifetime, but she also talked to me very convincingly about a mother and father that she had had in another life. And I mean, just like y'all would talk about my real mother and father. So they do believe very strongly in that kind of thing. Now, they also did another chant, and I didn't get all the words to it, but it went something like this. We all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return, like a drop of rain, hoof and horn, all shall be reborn. All that falls shall rise again. Grateful for what we have been given from earth and sun, we return some. And they took some of that cornbread and threw it into the air and toward the fire. Then they stood and joined hands to sink the circle. And that's when I stepped out of the circle. I thought they built it, they could sink it, you know. So I stepped back and let them do it. To sync the circle, they joined hands and then they gradually knelt down and they said something to the effect of, we return this circle to Mother Earth and to the nothing from which it came, and a few other things. Then they went back into the house for fellowship of chips and beer and wine and all this kind of stuff. Lady Phoenix wasn't there through part of that. She'd had to go and close her store there in Grand Prairie. So Tim asked me if I was surprised by anything, and I said no, I had done a lot of reading previously, so I kind of knew what to expect. He asked me if I had any questions. I did ask a little bit about the goddess being in the high priestess and one or two things like that. And then I told him, since he had recommended Drawing Down the Moon, which I have up here, by the way, I told him, I said, I've been reading Drawing Down the Moon. I was going to get in kind of the last big push here. And I said, have you read it? And he said, no, but I have it in my office. I use it as reference. I haven't read it all. I said, you need to read it. I said, I'm really surprised you would ask me to read it. I've really learned some things from it. I suggest you read it. And then I just walked off. Because I thought, anyone that intelligent, if you read this book, well, anyway. Okay. Are they, next question, are they involved in the weird things we've heard about, like ritual killings, human sacrifice, sex orgies, Satan worship? I've already addressed that just a little bit, but I'm going to address it just a little bit more. No and yes. Now, I want you to note two things. As we've already said, the Wicca Read, any harm, none, do as you will, is not an objective standard. It's subject to the will of the witch. So, and in other cultures, with other covens led by less scrupulous people, it has been used to justify ritual scourgings, abuse, and human sacrifice. I want you to note something else. The ancient background of that lunatic festival that I attended involved human sacrifice. Now that's from their sources. I didn't make that up. Also, the sex, nudity, and violence that's pictured on the cover sheet, I didn't dream that up. Not in a million years would I dream something like that up. I mean, this is from their sources. If you read from this Dr. Leo Martello's book, he mentions that Gerald Gardner, who was a witch, used the Wicca Read to justify some really weird things. It said to justify his sexual appetite. Now, witchcraft does not have built-in safeguards against such things. And taken to an extreme, in other cultures, human sacrifice is totally consistent with their beliefs and with their roots in ancient paganism. Now, does Lady Phoenix and her coven condone these things and practice these things? No, I don't think so. In visiting with her, I really doubt. She has some weird ideas, but I don't think that it would be carried to that extreme. I want you to note something else. Wicca is a secret religion. There are some things that can only be known by those who are initiated into it. We can only know also what they want us to know. And any of these fearful rumors can be denied as, well, they weren't really initiated. They didn't really know. Gary has a video that he uses here in the School of Preaching in one of his courses that's on Satanism and the occult, and I watched that video. There are some people who are interviewed on that video who came out of Wicca traditions in England, who came out of the Gerald Gardner type witchcraft, the Aleister Crowley type witchcraft, and some of the things they say will curl your toenails. Now, there are some blurred lines in some Wiccan traditions between Satanism and witchcraft. And I want to be true and represent them correctly. I don't believe that's true with Lady Phoenix group and with several that she is aware of. But I did find Aleister Crowley, a Satanist and a witch, Gerald Gardner, having a lot of communication and association with him. So there is some association there. Now, what about sex and nudity and that kind of thing? We've already seen some of that. Most covens do practice nudity in their rituals unless visitors are present. As I mentioned, Lady Phoenix group does at times. They call this sky-clad, and they say that it helps them generate greater psychic powers. It keeps everyone equal, and it communicates total freedom. Some groups even practice what they call the Great Rite, where the high priest and high priestess have sexual intercourse surrounded by the rest of the coven. But the dagger lowered into the chalice that I observed at this festival, that's the symbolic Great Rite. Most of the initiations into witchcraft, the one being initiated, is sky-clad. Now, you can look at some of the pictures in this book, Drawing Down the Moon. I also found a copy of what's called the Witch's Bible. You can look through that. I'm not sure how credible that is, but some of the people who are quoted are the same people quoted in Drawing Down the Moon, and some of the things that are said are about the same. So I'm pretty sure it's rather credible. You can feel free to look at that. Now, why do seemingly intelligent people get involved in witchcraft? I had a friend say to me one time, she said, these people must be a few bricks shy of a load. Well, that's what we tend to think. But again, I saw intelligent people there. People that you could probably may work with, this kind of thing. But I asked Lady Phoenix what she got from Wicca that she did not get from Christianity, and she said this: I had come home. It was a good fit. It fit with every weave of my body. It fit every part of my being. She noted that it was in harmony with many things she had been taught and was already living by, like love of nature, reverence for the land, responsibility for our actions, harming no one. And then she said this, it's a direct quote, I could be true and walk the path here without violating someone's conscience. Now, I asked her this question, is Wicca harder or easier than Christianity? She knew where I was going with that one. So she backed away and she told me that I needed to make sure that I represented her correctly on that. She said Wicca was harder because of all of the stuff that she had to learn, which that let me know that maybe her rooting in Christianity and her learning and study of the scriptures had not been what it should have been. But you and I can see that if we just live by any harm none, do as you will, that'd be a pretty easy way to live, wouldn't it? A much easier way to live. She mentioned the dogma in Christianity, the exclusive nature of Christianity in general and of the Church of Christ in particular. She also mentioned our hypocrisy, and I addressed that in the manuscript, and I think you need to read that. She mentioned our inability to get along with each other, and we need to do some thinking on that. Now, from my reading and also from talking with Tim, he emphasized the same things about tolerance and also going back to our ancient roots in religion and everything. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that there is a major fascination in America with the ancient deities and ancient cultures and ancient religions. There is a tremendous fascination with that. We're fascinated by the religion and the practices of the Native Americans. Now, don't run from this and say, oh, we shouldn't learn this kind of thing. No, this is a part of history. It's a part of their culture. We need to learn about these people, but to become fascinated with and drawn into their worship and to begin to say, well, it's just another pathway. Are they really were spiritual and so on? Because, you see, history tells us, and this is what amazes me, because Tim was a teacher of anthropology. That's a study of man and a man's culture and so on. What amazed me is that someone who teaches and studies that has not looked past the fascination with the worship of the ancient deities. What happened when people worshiped those deities? What happened to the cultures that were involved in those nature religions? They were eventually destroyed. We need to realize that and perhaps help them see that. Read Romans chapter 1 as to what happens when people decide not to honor God and not to hold God in their knowledge. I think that I see in many of these people that Wicca satisfies a desire to feel spiritual without doing anything major, without major changes. I can just do what I want. deity is in you, so it appeals to the pride. There's also that secrecy that's involved, and sometimes that appeals to the desire to know the unknowable. And there may be even a superiority in having this special knowledge. And we just need to be aware of these kinds of things and how our kids can sometimes be drawn into this. Now, here's what I really want to get to. The light that shines in darkness. That's the theme of this lectureship. And I've just described to you some of the darkness out there in the world. But Jesus is the light of the world. And He told us that we are also lights and to let our light shine before men. I looked at this in terms of what can we learn? How can we dispel the darkness of witchcraft and paganism that so pervades our culture today? And how can we help our children who are growing up in a multicultural pagan environment? And it doesn't matter if you're homeschooled, if you send them to private schools, or if you have them in public schools, sooner or later they are going to be in this pagan society and this pagan environment. How can we help them? And I thought of two areas, teaching and life. That just about covers it, doesn't it? Teaching and life. And here's one thing I want to note. How am I doing on time? Okay, I'm going to take just I'm going to take a little bit more, okay? Because I've got to. All right, what can we learn? Okay, in our teaching, I've said this before from this room. We become like the God we worship, and therefore we need to know more about God. And we need to teach our children more about God. And one of the best places to do that is through the prophets. What did they say to Israel? Behold your God, the one who sits on the circle of the earth, the one who spreads out the heavens as a tent to dwell in. Romans chapter 1 shows us what happens when we leave the knowledge of God. If our God is involved in sexual incest, if He accepts human sacrifice, then we're going to become sexually depraved, and we're going to offer human sacrifice. Read 2 Kings 17 to see what happened to Israel when they began to honor the ancient pagan deities of the land. But if our God is holy, holy so that the whole earth is full of His glory, if He's exalted His eyes too pure to look upon iniquity, if He's loving and benevolent and gives us the grains at harvest through His kindness and benevolence, then we will strive to be holy. We will hate the sin that's in our lives, and we will live penitent lives, and we will be thankful to a God for His grace and mercy and His wonderful gifts. And we need to teach about God. The Bible is not just the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Peter, and Paul. It's the story of the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Peter, and Paul. We need to also know how Satan works. I speak to this a lot in the manuscript, but just a casual look at the Bible tells us Satan works through deception. Satan works through deception. Many times Lady Phoenix mentioned myth and ancient ritual and so on. Rosemary Altia's book is an interesting story, which she is the author and inventor of. Now, question. This is what I wanted to get to. Lauren, you know where I'm going, don't you? We talked about this Wednesday night in class. How do we know we have not been deceived? You see, a resurrection from the dead sounds just as fantastic as some of these things they were saying, at least to some people. How do we know we haven't been deceived? If you don't get anything else out of this lesson today, get this firmly fixed in your mind. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 and following. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 and following. This is why I came away from that ritual and from that interview thinking, they have been so deceived. And then I thought, how can I know? How can I help these children that I teach on Wednesday night know? How can I help you help your children know that we have not been deceived? And this scripture came to mind. For we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus, but were eyewitnesses of His majesty. For He received from God the Father honor and glory when there came such a voice to Him from the excellent glory, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And this voice from heaven we heard when we were with Him on the holy mount. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto ye do well that ye take heed as a light that shineth in a dark place. How can we know we have not followed cunningly devised fables? 2 ways: apostolic eyewitness and fulfilled prophecy. That's how we can know. That's what Peter said. That's how we can know. I address this a great deal in the manuscript, but I've got to say some of it right here. We have assumed a lot of times, because we have glibly said to our children, how do I know? The Bible tells me so. And we have assumed that they get it. But in this pagan environment they're growing up in, they're not necessarily going to get it. We need to give a strong dose of Christian evidences into our curriculum at all levels. We need to help them know that there is more manuscript evidence for this New Testament than there is from any literature of antiquity. We need to let them know that this was written at the time and circulated at a time when people who were alive could read it, know it, and refute it if it were not true. We need to let them know that the earliest existent manuscripts, complete manuscripts of your New Testament, date from about 250 BC. And the only thing that we can compare that to is the writing of Homer's Iliad. There are more manuscripts of that than there are any other ancient things. And from that, the earliest complete manuscript dates from the 13th century, but the earliest partial manuscript is about, I think, 500 or 600 years removed from the actual writing of that. We need to get these things down to our kids and to let them know. We don't just need to keep them in the adult Bible class. We need to help them see, and we did this Wednesday night in class, help them see that the New Testament reads like history, that Jesus is tied to a time and a place and historical events and people. Caesar Augustus, days of Herod the King, Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem. Read through the book of Acts and you read names like Gallio, Felix, Festus, Agrippa. It's not once upon a time in a land far, far away. And children can see the difference if we take the time to tell them. And we have assumed that they get it, and yet when they get to college, they're being told that the Bible is a myth in their literature classes and so on like that, and they say, well, maybe it is. If we can put these things into their hearts and minds while they're very young, it will help them. Jesus is the one who's rooted in history. He's not like Pan or Hearn of mythology, and the historical accounts of his life are credible. We have not followed cunningly devised fables. Also, fulfill prophecy, and that is one of the most neglected things in our curriculum with our children and even with our adults. Read Isaiah 48 verse 3, 46 verses 9 and 10, and 44 verses 6 through 8, and you'll find that God's saying, who is a God like me that can tell you before that something's going to happen and then cause it to happen? Who is a God who knows the end from the beginning? Not Hearn or Pan. Who is a God who knows that? Jehovah God, the creator of heaven and earth. Now, we need to take our children by the hand and lead them through the hallways of prophecy and point them to the one who walked those hallways in antiquity. If you need help with that in your Bible class curriculum, see me after this lesson, because we're working on some material right here that will help you. But we need to help children see that, and they can understand it, can't you, Lauren? She's in my Wednesday night class and she wanted to be here today. They can understand those prophecies, the highway of holiness. They can understand that a light would shine into people in darkness because unto us a child is born and a son is given. They can understand what it will be like when Jesus comes. It will be like a desert that will sprout and bloom with flowers and grow and water come there. They can understand the folly of builders building a temple and throwing away the cornerstone that the architect designed. They can understand those things if we take the time to show them. And fulfilled prophecy is one of the strongest proofs that your Bible is inspired, and it's one of the 2 strong proofs that we have not followed fables. Now, in our life, some of us live kind of sort of by the wicker reed. We just don't hurt anybody, go on about our business, and are a little bit selfish. We need to take care about our life and how we live. Take the teachings of Jesus. Take the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Imagine the most extreme case of people living by that. Put it in any culture. Do you have anything you would be afraid of? No. In fact, you have what God designed, which is righteousness that will exalt a nation and a people, and that will bless everyone that comes under the influence of that. Now, Wicca is a religion shaped by man to fit man. Lady Phoenix said it just fit. I'm here to tell you Christianity doesn't fit very well. There are times when I don't want to control my anger. There are times when I would like to just complain and complain and complain. There are times when I don't want to love you. There are times when I don't want to do good. Christianity is not a good fit. But Christianity wasn't designed to fit me. It was designed to fit my need. And Christianity fits my need because my need is the sin problem, and Jesus takes away sin. And He helps me deal with sin. Finally, ladies, Christianity is exclusive. And we need never apologize for that. A God who tolerates everything is a God who values nothing. And a God who values nothing is of no value. He's just a bunch of dead sticks if He values nothing. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. We do not serve a God that wants to condemn people just because they don't practice a certain thing, but we serve a God who loved us, who purchased us at great cost to Himself, who gave us His word as a lamp and as a light. He saw us struggling in sin, trying to make our way by our own path. He hurt. He loved, He cared, and He acted. He sent Jesus, God with us. Not God above us, not God beneath us, but God with us. And on the cross, He paid the price for sin. He cleansed us. He set us free from the slavery of sin and death. And He asked us to walk His path. Not our path, not just another path, but His path, because His path leads to life. He has given us help to walk that path, and He is an example worthy of our imitation. Shall we pray together, please? Father, thank You. Thank You that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light, and that those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death, on them has the light shined. Thank You for the light. Thank You that we do not have to be prisoners in the darkness of sin, in the darkness that pervades us through the occult and other degenerate religions. And Father, help us to have compassion for these people who have been deceived. Help us to reach out to them. And Father, help us also to take heed to the doctrine that we teach, and help us to take heed to our lives so that we can truly shine as lights in the midst of this wicked and perverse generation. Bless us and strengthen us and use us always in Your service. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Wow. Thank you for being here, and thank